Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, let me thank you for your leadership in holding this hearing. There are very, very important questions that have been raised and discussed here today, and you've assembled an extremely distinguished panel of witnesses here to help us consider them. I appreciate it very much. As the son and grandson of Foreign Service officers, I have some idea of what a career ambassador is. And so, Ambassador Pickering, first let me thank you for your extremely distinguished service to our nation over many years, both in the military and in our foreign service. I would like to ask you first, because I know you have obligations elsewhere, and anybody else can chime in if they wish, the following question. We don't know yet what was done. And there has been considerable sentiment expressed by several of the witnesses here that it is in our interest for a whole variety of reasons, because it helps define who we are as a nation, because it rebuilds our credibility and our relationships abroad, because it's a return to the rule of law and so forth, that it is distinctly in the public interest for this information to come out. Let me ask you if you think there is a point where the conduct in question was so abhorrent to decent and civilized people in America and around the world that at that point the public interest that you've described reverses itself. And at some point, if it's awful enough, does it become in our public interest as a nation to try to keep this swept under the rug, or to use Mr. Schwartz's phrase, that we must not flinch, must we not flinch irrespective of how painful this view will be for our country? Ambassador Pickering.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you for your kind comments, and I had the privilege and honor of working with your father. My answer to your question is very simple: no. I do not believe that any degree of abhorrence, any degree of violation of values, principles, trusts, laws, should be swept under the rug because it is so devastating for the reputation of the United States that it must be kept secret. In fact, the laws on secrecy don't provide for that in the first place. Secondly, it doesn't, in my view, hold water to believe that anything quite so notorious will ever remain secret in this town or in this country or in this world. And thirdly, if indeed it took place and was of such character as to put it into that category, then it is the duty and indeed the requirement of all branches of the United States government to do everything in their power to make sure that it never happens again, which is the major purpose for the commission that I support and the major purpose for my being here to try to support that type of commission.
Thank you, Ambassador Pickering. Attorney General Farmer, you and I were attorneys general together. I'm delighted to see you here with us, and I appreciate very much your distinguished career of public service. The issue that a commission is going to face, as a former prosecutor, the chairman is a former prosecutor, Senator Cornyn was Attorney General with all of us also. It's sort of a little reunion here today. There are obviously some hindrances to a prosecution based on this conduct. Reliance on the legal opinions of the OLC is one. Some sort of theory of equitable estoppel might be another. What reliance did to intent might be another. But in each of those areas, they are of limited protection. For instance, a mobster can't paper over a racketeering conspiracy with his mob lawyer saying this is a legitimate business and make the risk of prosecution go away. The doctrine of equitable estoppel is disfavored against the federal government, almost never applied rigid and sparing, I think is the phrase used about when its application is permitted. And intent, obviously, as we all know, is a question of fact, which is determined by the ultimate fact finder. So immunity is going to become a significant question, I think, in this. Should we try to build into, assuming that the commission should have some immunity, and I think most of the witnesses agree if they think there should be such a one, that it should have power to grant immunity, how should the relationship between the commission and prosecutors be described in any legislation that might establish such a committee? Should they be required to coordinate with the Department of Justice? Should they be required to obtain the sign-off from the Attorney General before they grant immunity? You want it to kind of steer clear of an active prosecution, not just on the question of immunity, but on the question of not trampling the prosecutive strategy of the Department of Justice. How would you work that?
I think the issue of immunity is one that will be driven by the previous issue, which is what is the scope of the investigation going to be? And I think that's really, I think, the toughest issue that the committee has to address. If the mission is drawn too broadly, and I would argue if it's drawn so broadly that it captures issues such as did these tactics make us less safe, as opposed to simply finding what the facts are, I think the commission will lose credibility because you'll end up having to prove a negative. But assuming that the mission and the scope of the mission as defined by the committee does have the commission focusing on individual cases, it seems to me that immunity is going to be an issue that has to be dealt with. And my suggestion would be that some form of coordination with the Justice Department would be appropriate. What the specifics of that coordination would be would depend, again, on how the scope of the commission's job is defined.
Thank you, Ambassador Pickering. I want to keep to our commitment and please.